Hello, Kalsoom. Welcome to Convo with Convo, and in fact, welcome to Fireside Chat with us. It's a pleasure to have you here on board. And if you could introduce yourself for our audience, although we have given a pre-hype previously, but coming it out of your side, that would be great about you and Invest to Innovate Ventures.
Sure. So hi, everybody. Assalamu alaikum. So my name is Kalsoom. I am the co-founder and general partner at Eye Ventures. We are a early stage venture capital fund for Pakistan. We opened our doors in 2019. I'm also the founder of our sister entity, Invest to Innovate, which is a company that I founded 10 years ago and has been a player in the startup ecosystem in Pakistan for the last decade. Our VC fund, which I co-founded with my partner Misbah, which opened its doors in 2019, was basically born out of the work that we've been doing in the market for the last 10 years through Invest to Innovate. So two separate entities, but Eye Ventures is where I have my full hat and my energy right now. And I'm an advisor, but I don't run the day-to-day of our sister company that I founded.
All right, glad to know that. So Kulsum, we'd be discussing, in fact, we'd be having a deep dive into the Pakistani startup ecosystem for this episode. I'd say a remarkable year for Pakistani startups, getting almost 230 million in investments in the first 3 quarters of 2021 as compared to $77 million in the previous year. So Pakistan has moved, has moved up the ladder to 75th position worldwide and second in South Asian region. So we'd love to hear your thoughts on these, and please enlighten us regarding the major sectors receiving these investments, the key players.
Sure. Yeah. I mean, I think everyone knows it's been a record year, as you just mentioned. Record 3 quarters, right? And I think we're on track for, inshallah, Q4 is still here. We still have a few months left of the year. So I think there's a lot that's happening. I think Pakistan has really had like a steady increase, and then this year has been a bit exponential in what we've seen. I think what was happening before is that we had a lot of deals happening in Pakistan, but most of them were pre-seed and seed stage deals. And it was really, we started to see some Series A starting to happen in 2018, and then those companies graduating to Series B deals with Baikia, obviously in 2020, and then obviously now with Cheat Day, Airlift, and a bunch of others. And we're also seeing the size of the deals increase. We're seeing now, a lot of international VC money coming into the market. So it's kind of the confluence of a number of different factors. I think the first thing has been the regulatory environment has gotten better considerably for companies, especially the fact that founders can set up holdcos abroad makes it a lot easier and a lot less risky, at least perception wise, for international investors to put money into companies in Pakistan because they're not putting their money into Pakistan directly. I think, obviously we're seeing the fintech space take off, and those markets are some things that we've seen. E-commerce and fintech tend to be the top 2 sectors that raise the most amount of money in most emerging markets when the ecosystem starts to heat up. We saw that same trajectory in the Middle East as well as in Indonesia. We've seen that happen in India as well. And so Pakistan's following that same trajectory right now. And I think we're also seeing a lot of models that have been successful in other markets start in Pakistan. So even though some people might have criticisms of the fact that it's a bit of a copycat model, that also has led to a lot of international funds that may have been a little risk averse about Pakistan as a market, having invested in models that they've done in other markets, being able to put money into a similar model, because even if they don't understand the market, they at least understand the model. And so a lot of those things happening at the same time, obviously, like, with the Careem exit, with people joining these larger companies like Baikia, Airlift, and then leaving and starting their own companies, we're creating a really strong talent pool of founders. So a lot of those things all just started to happen at the same time. So kind of that acceleration or the velocity of everything has just increased considerably over the last 18 months.
So very true. So very true. Speaking of the key players, Airlift, they've received $85 million in a Series B round, Bazaar with $30 million in Series A. We have Tajir getting $17 million in Series A. So I think these are the prominent players that we have. Factors leading to such aggressive funding rounds that you very rightly quoted. Are the VCs flooded with cash looking for good investment opportunities, or is it state banks' initiatives, including the set sweat equity and convertible debt? Please enlighten us on these factors that's leading to this aggressive funding these days.
Yeah, I mean, I wouldn't say it was the convertible debt or equity because I think most of the rounds that we're seeing are still straight equity rounds right
Okay.
now. And then a lot of people investing in safes, which aren't convertibles, right? And then obviously for me, it's the holdco. That to me was the game changer, the ability to set up holding companies abroad as Pakistani tax residents and being able to hold equity abroad. That was a big deal.
Okay.
So I would actually just say that, these companies that are coming up in Pakistan are addressing very, very large market opportunities. And I think at a time when, in India, what was really interesting when we saw the push of B2B e-commerce for, people servicing Kirana stores in India, like Oran and a few other players that came up, the Indian government actually incentivized a lot of informal players to become part of the formal sector by creating tax incentives, right? And right now in Pakistan, with FBR, there still aren't tax incentives for people to go online, but because of COVID and the pandemic, a lot of people were pushed online because things were shut down and things that were happening. So things just started to naturally happen whereas it might have been a bit difficult in terms of adoption before. I think Badger is a really interesting example of a company that started pre-COVID, right? And then we saw that increase considerably when COVID happened, of people ordering online, of people of, these guys getting more comfortable of using their phones and things like that to order things. And so I think as a result, like while there were always these market opportunities were always large, I think the adoption or the addressable market is getting better and larger because of people being more comfortable with being digital. And so even though I personally believe the elephant in the room is FBR, those are the reforms need to happen in order for people to be fully wanting to become a part of the formal sector. I think as a result of these companies having very large opportunities in front of them and addressable markets that are getting considerably larger, that's why we're seeing funding rounds also match that. And I think before people were always trying to build big companies. I just think that it was difficult to think big because there just wasn't money that was out there for it, right?
Very
so
true.
I think it all kind of started happening at the same time.
All right. Yeah, and the same sort of thing happened with just as with Tajir, Grocers app, but the same thing they had a 300% increase in their net revenues because of the pandemic, to say the least. So yes, tax incentives is one such thing that plays a major role in boosting local investments as well, not only just foreign venture capitals. And okay, so regarding the international VCs, obviously starting off with Invest to Innovate, Kleiner Perkins, 20 VC.
Well, Invest to Innovate's considered, we're a local player, but yes, the Kleiner, we're not comparative to Kleiner Perkins is Kleiner Perkins, right? They're like a tier one international VC. So for us, we consider ourselves, even if our jurisdiction is abroad, we're a local fund, but we're one of the local players. But yeah, sorry, continue.
So how do they look at the landscape in Pakistan for startup ecosystem right now? Speaking of the international VCs.
Yeah. So, I mean, I speak to a lot of international VCs now on a pretty regular basis. I think we all speak to one another on every deal that is looked at. And actually, in my last 4 deals that I've been in, every single one has had a number of international funds in there. I think those VCs that are coming into Pakistan are just kind of really bullish on the market, right? I think the fact that Pakistan, the valuations are getting higher for sure right now, but it's still less expensive comparatively to if they were in a deal in Indonesia. I think that, I think where Pakistan is going trajectory wise is something that people can understand and see. And so I think a lot of VCs that are coming into the market are just really excited about the opportunity. And then once they're in a deal, oftentimes to pull the first trigger is hard. Once they're in a deal, then they start to get to know the country a little bit, the market a little bit. And that, I mean, every single VC that I've seen come into the market has then like done other deals quite fast after and successively. So, one of my mentors like sends me a deck like every other day, right? He's been in a number of deals already, including in Bazaar. And so I think that you're just going to see a lot of the funds once they're in will make it much easier for them to continue to invest in the market.
Very right. And also, I think a substantial increase in internet penetration in the last few years, say from 24% to 76%, that has labeled Pakistanis as heavy internet users. So, do you think that has played a part in this growth?
Yeah, I mean, for sure. I think that, we're very much a mobile first economy in terms of people mostly using, obviously internet consumption is important, but obviously they're using data on their phones. So for me, a more interesting statistic is the fact that we have one of the cheapest data packages in the world, right?
Very
So as
true.
data becomes a lot cheaper, it becomes easier for people to be using TikTok on their phones. I mean, my driver uses TikTok, right? I think that's the thing. It's so ubiquitous, a lot of these apps that become easier. So, I think it's really important to say that because I think it's less about if you're on your laptop using the internet versus like if you're in a Guyana store and the next generation, like not maybe the owner, but his son
Right.
is using his phone and leveraging TikTok, using TikTok anyway, and then is much more easy to get him to adopt Dodgers app, or I mean, we're investors in credit book. So like the credit book app, right. For things like that. So adoption just people become much more literate when it comes to technology, especially when things are a lot cheaper to use on their phones.
Very right. Uh, Kulsum, would also like for you to enlighten us on otherwise recent and not so recent releases as well. We'd like to talk about Deal Flow Tracker, the Pakistan Entrepreneurship Report, Scaling Readiness Toolkit, and Startup Investors Toolkit. So please guide us through that
Sure.
as well.
Sure. So our research team sits in our sister entity. Obviously, there's a lot of overlap, and I continue to work with our research team really closely.
Okay.
Yeah, I mean, our basic premise with the insights team is that we put out research that provides value to not just our ecosystem, but people looking outside into Pakistan. And so, as you know, there's just for us, what guided the vision behind Insights, the research arm, was that there was just a lack of really good data on research on what was happening in the Pakistan market. And so as people were looking outside in, if there is a perception issue, a lot of this idea of risk, there is real risk in the Pakistan market, but a lot of it is also a perception challenge, right? They're reading things in the news headlines and things like that. So a lot of those perception issues can be mitigated by good research. And if we for me, I believe information is power. And so the more information we put out there, the better, right? So where the deal flow tracker as an example, I believe good data should be free. And so we have all the startup deals that have been in the market that have been disclosed from 2015 to 2021 to present day. We triangulate a lot of those deals. So we check the numbers, we make sure, speaking to investors, we put in as much information as we can. And then I think the value of the data is what you create with it. So then we create visualizations, graphics every quarter. What we did just last week is we released a fintech briefing on the sector that's really heating up, and we leveraged the data in our deal flow tracker to talk about what the stats look like and what that meant, where we're seeing a lot of traction even within the fintech space, what verticals are coming up and things like that. So the whole purpose of Insights, and there is overlap with how that works with our investment side, because obviously that helps to there's a lot of things that you see out there for the world, and then there's a lot of internal things that we do that help inform us as investors, so that we're not just spraying and praying and just hoping for the best. We're actually being informed by data. And also our research team works a lot with our portfolio companies on helping them gather user insights and things like that. So that's the overlap. But the things that are important that we put out there for the world, I mean, that's the thought leadership that we believe is important as people are looking at the Pakistan market. How are we arming them with the right information so that they can make the best decisions? And so that they don't, if they mess up, people are always going to make mistakes, but we would ideally like to mitigate those mistakes with good information.
Very true. So IDY is involved in on three fronts right now. That's an accelerator program, a partner program, and the Insights, if I'm not wrong.
Yeah. So our investment fund sits totally separately. That is a separate entity. Underneath Invest to Innovate, which I'm no longer the CEO of, Mavish Arifin is our amazing CEO. That includes our accelerator, all of our support programs for startups. We have programs right now with the World Bank, the IFC, starting a program with Facebook right now. All of that sits under Invest to Innovate. And then also our research team, correct, sits all under that umbrella. And then there's obviously a relationship between the two. From our fund perspective, we get access to, obviously we get to see really great companies through the companies that go through those programs. And then obviously we work with our research team, but they are separate entities.
Right. So considering the total, I would say, projection of the Pakistani startup ecosystem, where do you think are we lacking, or is it the lack of technical knowledge, or it's shortage of funds? Comparing it to the past years, let's say 5 years ago from now, and standing at where we are right now.
I think that, there still continues to be challenges on the regulatory front. I still think that it's important, the challenge of moving money in and out of the country is still very much a major issue, stuff related to payments, even though the state bank is improving things. I think a lot of those things altogether, are getting better, but I still think that we need to improve that. I would say from a talent perspective, I think it's becoming really expensive to hire good tech talent in Pakistan. And I think there is a lot of demand, especially as these startups are growing, to hire more and more tech talent. And some of our companies have had to go outside of Pakistan, ironically, to find talent. So I think producing talent that's not only cost effective, but also high caliber. We have good tech talent, but a lot of them, there's all these outsourcing shops. They get paid a lot from Silicon Valley. So you're competing against that as well as with other startups that are raising. There's also generally like a lack of good talent at the middle management. And so when people are really growing to their Series A and beyond, of like hiring really good talent that can manage people, that have soft skills, leadership skills. So that requires investment of time as well. I think another big challenge is that as much as there's quote unquote, like a lot of money being raised, only 3% of the funding has gone towards women founded or co-founded companies, right? So there's still very much a gender gap that exists in the startup space. I think that if you're not in one of the hot sectors in Pakistan, it is hard for you to raise, right? So I think it's important to state that not everybody has been able to raise. And then also there's a privilege thing, right? Like people, obviously, a lot of these international funds, they understand better people that speak similar to them if they had an outside degree or are very polished. And that doesn't speak, to my opinion, the majority of the country where there's as much, if not more talent, but maybe need a little bit of work, right, on terms of being able to present themselves better. And so I still think, and that's really why our accelerator program and things that we do on the support side is so important, because we need to really work on like how we get companies more ready for investment that are as deserving as other companies that have raised investment. So I still think that gap exists, and that challenge of privilege with entrepreneurship exists globally. It's not just Pakistan, but I'm definitely seeing that happen right now with the companies that have raised money. And it's not taking away from their success. It's more just how do we raise everybody up in the economy.
All right. So having said that, do you think the startups in Pakistan, they're going in the right direction, particularly in terms of how investors look at the startups in Pakistan? And also to shed some light on why do you think startups fail?
So I think that we're definitely going in a good direction. I think that I'm really cautiously optimistic. I still think that sometimes when I see outside investors, they can turn around a term sheet in 24 hours. They don't really do, a lot of them, some of them don't really do that much diligence, right? And that's really the purpose of a local fund like us. Like, there's Sarmaya Karzain, like all of us that are on the ground, like we should serve the purpose of also anchoring that in the knowledge of the market, of checking. I mean, we make sure that we go out and visit things and we see things in person and we make sure things check out, right? So I think sometimes the danger of things moving so fast is that we're not necessarily really making sure that the company is going to work. And so when you talk about like why companies fail, sometimes you grow too fast, right? Because there's just so much money involved. And this is the toxic cycle that exists in venture around the world of like venture capital. The reason why it's considered, sometimes people see it as toxic, is because more money means that you need to get to a higher valuation the next time. It means that then you need to raise more money and you need to do this. And so sometimes you just see that cycle of, even in companies in India as an example of companies that have become have made headlines for being really bad work environments and things like that.
Right.
Like we just need to be sure of what we're building, right? Are we building for value? Or are we building, and what does value mean? For me, value is like you're building companies that actually have a strong path to profitability, that actually have figured out their unit economics, that have actually like built teams that will last, right? And so I think it's really important in the speed of everything that we're doing is to not forget that. And I think that we talk about that a lot academically in the venture capital space, but I still think that behavior is still very much a lot of FOMO and people wanting to crowd into rounds and people feeling like they're going to miss out. So they're willing to like push other people out of deals. And so to me, that's not productive. It's also not, for me, the right way to go. If we want to build companies that last in Pakistan, we need to focus on those things. And to your point about why companies fail, I think a lot of companies don't raise, there's so many reasons companies fail. If they don't raise enough money, they raise money too late. When they raise too much money, and the valuations that they had, they couldn't keep up. So there's so many things that people fail at. And so I think it's really important to have a really strong balance of being focused and also aggressive at the same time. So I don't think there's anything wrong with having a focus because
Very
I think
true.
sometimes we lose that in the market right now.
Very right. Okay, speaking of the global startup ecosystem rankings, let's say in trends in our top 20 countries, we have countries like United States, UK, Canada, Germany, Sweden. So what do we need to do to make it up to that list? And with that, how does the economic landscape contribute in attaining this goal for Pakistani startup ecosystem?
Yeah, I think it's really important to not look at global rankings and see where we fit with that, because there's so many things that are out of our control. We're a developing country, right? I mean, macroeconomically, Bangladesh is doing better than we are macroeconomically in the region, right? So I think it's important to say, like, let's look at emerging markets and emerging market numbers. Like, that's what we need to compare ourselves to, because all of those emerging market countries are developing. If I was to look at the companies that are, the companies that become unicorns here in the US are solving for very different problems than what we're seeing in Pakistan, right? Or in the region. And so that to me it's comparing apples and oranges. Like, I think if I wanted Pakistan to become the next Indonesia, which inshallah hopefully we're on the path of doing right now. What is it? The trajectories that we're seeing there are really important to compare ourselves to, right? How do we increase the ability for people to consume, for consumer classes to have deeper pockets to be able to consume more, right? Because then e-commerce goes back up. From a fintech perspective, people have deeper pockets to be able to use the products that are being created, right? And so those are things that are out of our control from us in the startup landscape, right? Those are things that economically as a country we need to be better at solving for, in terms of people's per capita GDP, in terms of what people are spending and how they have the ability to, right? So I don't know, for me personally, I don't care much about us being like the next US. I want us to be the next like Indonesia. I want us to really be countries that are moving in the direction of like where other emerging markets are. And I think Pakistan's on the path to that, but I do think that some of these bigger issues are things that I can't personally solve for. I mean, we can be on working groups and which we all have been, of like why State Bank has made certain regulatory changes, but that's ultimately the role of the government, right? To actually solve for those problems.
Exactly. That's something for the government to be contributing to this change. And when it comes to government, what key areas you think need to be in the reform to provide a favorable atmosphere for the startups to grow in Pakistan? Entirely from the government's perspective.
FBR, first and foremost, is never in any room. Every time we talk about State Bank and SECP and all the changes that are happening there, FBR is never in any of those conversations, right? So for me, that is, the tax regime in Pakistan is extremely onerous. It is extremely difficult for a company to do well if they want to actually be on the books. And because of just how the tax structure is, right? So would love to see those changes happen. I would love to see from, obviously SVP and SECP are doing some really great stuff, even SECP with this SECP sandbox. creating, incentives for people in the fintech sector that don't need an EMI or aren't touching money, but can apply for the sandbox. Those are really great initiatives, right? So I just think that seeing that all together continue to improve and happen, I think are going to be very strong things. I know that, just generally create incentives for everything. I know some of these like special technology zones and things like that are aiming to create tax breaks and things like that. So just moving in that direction and having the right stakeholders in the room, which means people from the sector, from the startup space, which right now some of the bodies are doing a really good job of engaging everyone. My partner Misbah has been on a lot of the SBP working groups. Our good friend Mubarak Siddiqui is like the one that been like a lot of enacting that's happening. He's been doing a lot of the behind the scenes stuff with. Just making sure that the stakeholders that are going to be impacted by those changes are the ones that are in the room helping form those policies.
Right. Let's hope for the best that we get through all these changes and we'll get to set these reforms at earliest. Kalsoom, thank you so much for your insights with us, and thank you so much for your time. This would conclude our discussion for now. So it was indeed a pleasure having you on board, and have a great day ahead. Thank you so much.
Thank you so much.
You're welcome.